On today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, it is a trade deadline live reaction show special with me and your boy, Steele Rodin.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome to a very, very special episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Big Flip Livingstone and Steele Rodin. Steele, my boy, is right out of the College of Sports Media, and you can find his work on all platforms under NHL Quick Hits. He is the DFS guru. I'm your boy, Big Flip Livingstone, and you have seen my work on the platforms such as The Score and CBC, Hockey Night in Canada, and plenty more. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. It is a special episode where we will be taking a deep look into all of the action from NHL Trade Deadline Day. It has already been a busy one. We will be breaking down trades and talking to local experts from all of your teams to keep you up on the action. And of course, breaking things down from a fantasy and betting angle. We are excited to be here, part of the Locked On Fantasy Network. Thank you for being here. Steele, this is a special episode, and I'm obviously fired up for it. Lots of trades trickling in, lots of moves. There's a lot to talk about, my friend.
There is a lot to talk about. I think we're definitely going to be starting in the Atlantic Division. The top four teams in the Atlantic Division have made some serious trades, some serious additions to make their team better. And for me, probably the most dangerous division heading into the playoffs,
right.
Especially with the next 20 games, of the next 20 regular season games going. But heading into the playoffs, these four teams are going to be very dangerous. We're going to all four of them. We're going to look at some of the biggest trades of the day, especially coming out west from the Minnesota Wild in the second segment. But I think we really have to start off with probably the best team that has made the best trades for their team, the Florida Panthers. They are looking stacked right now.
Florida Panthers, Boston Bruins, Tampa Bay Lightning, even the Toronto Maple Leafs all made significant moves, but I think you're spot on. The Florida Panthers, we talked about a lot in the lead up to the deadline, already looking like a Stanley Cup team. And what do? They go out there and arguably add the two biggest trade target names, at least the rental target in Claude Giroux. That's a big add. The team, we talked about it. The team was already beastly from top to bottom, only concern maybe in net. What do? They go out and bolster their entire lineup. This team might not be the odds-on cup favorite. They're just behind the Colorado Avalanche, but I think they deserve to be right there, Steele, and boy, are they starting to look dangerous.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to get into the Stanley Cup odds later in the show. We'll digest a little bit, sprinkle some money on which teams, who has the best odds right now. But you're right. Mm-hmm. The fact that they were able to go out and get Ben Chiarot, help them on the back end, especially with Aaron Ekblad out of the lineup right now with injury. Hopefully he'll be back soon, healthy. But as well to go out and get Claude Giroux. There were rumors out there. Maybe they were true, but apparently Colorado, New York, and Boston have had all sent trades to Philadelphia, but they honored Claude Giroux's wishes that he wanted to go to Florida, and they said no, he's not. We're not sending him over to Boston and New York. So it was only Florida and Colorado on the table. But the fact that Florida was able to get Claude Giroux for what they gave up, Owen Tippett, a first and a third round pick, and they got Giroux, a fifth round pick, and two prospects in return, that is a huge win for the Florida Panthers.
Huge win for what's already, a disgusting looking cup caliber lineup when you just have a quick glance at it. And honestly, if I'm the rest of the Atlantic Division, I'm a bit shook, especially if I'm the Boston Bruins and Toronto Maple Leafs, because I think the Florida Panthers clearly just announced to the rest of the division and the league that we're here and we're going for it. And, like I just said, if I'm those other teams in the Atlantic and even the rest of the league, I've definitely, taken notice in a very, very big way, Steele.
Yeah, and, them sitting at the top of the division, they have home ice advantage as well. So it's going to be a big swing for the Florida Panthers. Let's get the Locked On Panthers host Armando Velez out here so he can help us digest some of the trades. Armando, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Just wrapped up
you look
doing my live show and then jumping on here, just going back and forth and just refreshing the Twitter for all the moves made and possibly ones that could leak after. George Richards of Florida Hockey Now said that the Florida Panthers are done with their trades, that Bill Zito will be walking down to the media room as we speak. So it looks like that the Florida Panthers are done, barring anything else.
Yeah, I would
you
say
look
that they are done.
Over there.
Yeah, they should be done, but who knows, really? Who knows? Hey, crazier things have happened, but I think if you're a Florida Panthers fan, you are sitting in a very happy state right now. I think you would have already been before. You know, Armando, we talked a lot about on this show how balanced the Florida Panther team already was, and they go out and add these two major pieces. But what I want to know from you, actually, before we talk about anything trade-wise, is the smaller trade they had to make to beef up the back end a little bit more with Aaron Ekblad being out with injury. What do you think this means for the team down the stretch, and when do you see him coming back? What are the reports saying?
Well, they say 5 to 7 weeks as far as the recovery. So 5 to 7 weeks, we're talking about maybe just before the playoffs. But I mean, of course, with cap related stuff, we're seeing that maybe he could start practicing a week or two before game one of the first round. And of course, they use that LTIR space to trade for Robert Hagel of the Buffalo Sabres for a 6th-round pick, a pick that they got from the Sam Bennett trade last year. So that 6th-round pick was one that they acquired. And of course, the moving around of the assets that weren't theirs. I mean, from the Sam Bennett trade last year to get Haig, the Frank Petrano trade this time around to get a piece like a Ben Chiarot, moving that to a different spot. But also one thing that's not talked about is, as far as these trades go, is the fact that Bill Zito is able to make some of these top 10 protected for the Florida Panthers. I mean, the trade this year to Buffalo for Sam Reinhart, it's not going to be in the top 10, but we have the trade over to Montreal that is top 10 protected, and the one to Philly. So if things go wrong for the Florida Panthers next year, those picks that those other teams traded for, it's going to be a little delayed in their timeline when they get to reap the benefit of the picks. Of course, people in Florida Panther land don't wish that. Of course, they are billed to be a contender for many years, but also the reason why they went for it is because money troubles coming up with Keith Yandel's buyout. A majority of it will be on next year. Sergei Bobrovsky's contract is still a big cap hit on the team. Barkov's new deal is going to be hitting next year, the first year of that extension.
Huge.
Huberdeau's extension, if he were to get extended, won't kick in until the year after. So they got to prepare for a little bit. It'll be Mackenzie Weegar's last year of his deal. So they got a little bit of cap stuff coming up. So that's why they said this is the year.
Well, thank God they're making this the year. And all you Florida Panther fans are probably super ecstatic right now, especially with that big deal for Claude Giroux on the top line. He's going to be playing alongside Alexander Barkov. How do you feel about that trade? If it were me, I'd be out of my seat, jumping up ecstatically right now.
This whole time I've said that Claude Giroux being added to the Florida Panthers has always been a bonus. This isn't a deal that they necessarily had to make. And many people around Florida Panthers circles, the goal, number one goal, was always to get a middle pairing defenseman. And Claude Giroux was always going to be a bonus. So the fact that they got that bonus, it's the icing on the cake. I mean, he led the Philadelphia Flyers in power play time on ice, so he's going to be a contributor to that power play. We don't know what unit it's going to be, but with the experience, I think when the playoffs go around, he's going to be on that top pair, because that experience is something that you have to put out there, especially where we've seen him score big goals in the playoffs. I mean, he helped the Philadelphia Flyers get all the way to the Stanley Cup final in 2010. Of course, fell short. But of course, you get that experience. I mean, of course, with experience in Joe Thornton as well, Patrick Hornquist as well, just to name a few. So it's a big mix of all these experienced players who have been to the final and fallen short, and then of course one who won it all, and the experience of the core three of Barkov, Huberdeau, Ekblad.
Hey, it's a beautiful looking core, and really it's now on the Florida Panthers to put up or shut up, because their front office has done their side of things. Armando, you've done your side of things. Thank you so much for hopping on today and providing some really awesome insight for the Florida Panthers. I wish you luck down the stretch. I hope these moves pay off. I think they will, definitely from a fantasy perspective. Stay tuned for some more breakdown on that. Stay tuned for lots more guests. But Armando, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of today.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me.
Well, Steele, there you have it, my friend. This is an exciting little format, YouTube Live. Thank you for being here on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast Trade Deadline Reaction Special. We are talking about the Atlantic Division at this point, a little bit of an arms race going on. That is for sure. Steele, let's talk about a team who maybe didn't be as active as some fans would like, definitely in the Toronto market. Let's talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs with our next local Locked On host, who I know is excited to talk about today. There he is. He's here. It's Mr. David Morasuti of the Locked On Leafs podcast, I believe a fellow graduate of Centennial Sports Media College.
Hey,
there he is.
Right now.
Shout out the Centennial Mafia for all of you out there. And listen, the Toronto Maple Leafs have always got the looking glass on them. We always, under the big media bubble, they make one big move. They make a couple of interesting smaller moves, even in the net. So I say we start with, what do you think the trade grade, overall grade of the day is for Kyle Dubas? I'm switching it up for David because I know he's serious. What kind of grade does Kyle Dubas get for today?
I mean, for today, it's more so maybe what they didn't do. I'm kind of go with a C because I felt like with the injury to Rasmus Sandin,
right,
and you look at the upfront, the uncertainty of Andre Kasha and things like that, the Leafs are going to have to hope for a lot to go right for them from now until the end of the season. It's really tough. Look, Giordano, great addition. He brought up Lyubushkin from a few weeks ago, another good addition for the blue line. But other than that, like up front, he's banking on what he has, and it just shows how limited he was going into this deadline.
Well, you talk a little bit about the uncertainty of Andre Kasha, and for me, in that Seattle Kraken trade, a very underrated player is called Blackwell. The fact that we were able to get him as well, I think he would fit in very, very nicely on the right wing side on the fourth line, playing with Jason Spezza and Wayne Simmons potentially. But I think he's a very underrated player. He's 28 years old, 29 years old, I believe. So I think the fact that we were able to get Mark Giordano and Colin Blackwell for, two second round picks and a third pick, and being able to 50%, Seattle retaining 50% of Giordano's salary was pretty solid in my opinion.
It's not bad. What do you think, David?
That deal I didn't have any issues with, really. And the Blackwell edition could prove to be a very underrated one in that regard. I do think that they were looking for something for that fourth line because it has looked stale at times. Jason Spezza has been in and out. Wayne Simmons has been in and out. Even Kyle Clifford, they tried that and it just didn't work. And Nick Robertson has proven he's not a fourth line guy. He needs to be with, I feel he's at his best when he's on that second line. So maybe that's something they consider again down the road. But no, I think Colin Blackwell can solidify himself in that fourth line. I think if he can bring an offensive presence to that line, it'll be a bonus there for the Leafs. It'll be kind of like the cherry on top of that Giordano trade.
Here's my thing. We're talking about Blackwell. We're talking about these minor down the lineup impacts. We're talking about the rest of this division loading up.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned, even if I wasn't a diehard Leafs fan, just from the outside looking in, and I'm both. So I look at it like this, David. If they get bounced in the first round again, which I would say on paper right now, after the teams we know they're likely going to have to face, it's going to be tough for them to get out of this first round. If they don't get out of the first round, where do they go from here? What happens? Front office, behind the bench, or do you trade one of the big five? And big five, obviously, JT, the guys we know to talk about. But let's hear what you have to say before we have to jump on to the next guest.
Yeah, I think for the Leafs, really, if they don't make it out, this is going to be on, Brendan Shanahan asking Kyle Dubas, are you willing to break up this core and make a significant upgrade, like change there? Because if not, I think that will be, Kyle Dubas has been so loyal to this group that if he's not willing to make that move, I think Brandon Shanahan will find someone that will do it, because you cannot do nothing if you fall out early this year.
I totally agree. Steele, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I really like what Kyle Dubas has done, but I think you're both right here. If he's not the guy that is willing to part ways with, the top 4, the top 5s, if you're including Morgan Riley, then Brendan Shanahan's definitely going to have to, consider moving on from Kyle Dubas.
Yep, most definitely. And I think we're on the same page with David. David, thank you so much for jumping on, my friend. Good to see you. Shout out Centennial Mafia. And I hope the Leafs have some magic in the tank for, just from an overall entertainment perspective. But thanks for jumping on, my friend. Have a great day.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Hey, man, it's the Leafs are in tricky. We talked about this even before the deadline moves. Sure, Giordano's, everyone loves talking about underlying metrics now. Does that just mean like what he does, the little things? He does the little things well, and I think it's a good ad for sure. I don't think it's enough, even when the Bruins are making the moves like they are, Steele.
Yeah, the Bruins, they haven't been as active as the Florida Panthers, the Leafs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, even in the division, but they made a couple of big moves and a big signing as well. Let's get on Locked On Bruins host Ian McLaren here to help us digest some of the trades. Ian, thank you so much for being on here with us and helping us, kind of sort through the trades and the signings that Boston has made.
No problem. How's it going?
It's going very good. We're sitting here seeing all of the trades that are happening.
Yep.
Hampus Lindholm for Knicks John Moore, as well as another prospect. How do you even digest that, and the fact that they signed him for 8 years already?
I mean, that kind of makes the deal a bit more palatable. The fact that they're not giving up all those assets for a rental. It's a guy that they see as part of the core for the next 8 years. It's only him and McAvoy who are signed, very long term. They both can become free agents in like 2030 or something ridiculous like that. Mm-hmm. They see him as a mainstay in the top 4. From what he's saying, he's very happy to be a Boston Bruin. It sounds like he's wanted to be a Bruin for a little bit now. So it seems like, kind of a perfect match at the moment for the Bruins without having him, appear for the team yet. So we'll see how he fits in. But on paper, it's a nice match for sure.
And that's the move they did make, Ian. And I know you've been talking a lot about the need for some up-the-middle, second-line center help on this team. That's one of the clear needs. So maybe let's talk about the deal they didn't make. We saw early in the day they signed Jake Debrusk, people maybe indicating that was maybe a stumbling block to getting a deal done. Trade request not rescinded. Lots of news around Debrusk, and he ends up not getting moved unless something crazy happens here, which is probably too late to happen, but you never know. Do you think that was maybe, a missed opportunity to maybe bolster their lineup for what I know you think they really need, especially for, they're going to be pushing for a good playoff spot here.
Yeah, I've kind of been of two minds about this. I think the second line center, obviously, that's been a huge hole since David Krejci decided to go home and play in his native Czechia. But at the same time, the decision to bump David Pastrnak down to the second line has kind of made it where perhaps it doesn't matter who plays with Taylor Hall and David Pastrnak down the middle. You don't need an offensive force per se, just a guy who's steady, responsible, who can chip in occasionally. Yep. It used to be Krejci had no wings. Now they've got the wings. Just plug somebody in there and see what happens. So far, it's been working out. They wanted to do a kind of center by committee thing this season. Charlie Coyle was expected to be the second line guy. Right. He's fitting in on the third line pretty well. And I guess they're going to roll with the more concerning thing for me is just having Debrusk on his off wing. I'm not a huge fan of that, but he's been playing pretty well up there so far in limited time. So we'll see if it continues here down the stretch.
The amount of confidence Ian has in his voice right now makes me feel good as a Toronto Maple Leafs fan because things are uncertain for the Boston Bruins. Yeah. That's a hot take I'm taking away from this one. Ian McLaren, formerly of The Score, friend of the show and host of Locked On Bruins. Thank you for being here today, Ian, and good luck down the stretch, my friend.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Steele, we're rolling now, my friend. We're rolling now.
Oh yeah.
Like, honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think Boston did enough, but we know the
didn't.
bias. The bias is thick here. So
yeah. Yeah, they did. I don't think they did enough. I think they got their guy in Hampus Lindholm. I think signing him for 8 years, and he's happy to be there. All things considered, great for him, great for the organization. I think they were like, even though they signed Jake Debrusk, I still believe that he wants a trade to be done. He wanted to be dealt before the deadline. So he's still in Boston for 2 years. Something might happen, but again, I don't think they did enough. And I think the way the Atlantic Division is kind of lining out, in the actual standing wise, kind of proves what happened for the deadline as well. Like Florida Panthers went all out and they're in the top position. They're in first in the Atlantic. Tampa Bay, they made a big move, just one big move, and they got Brandon Hagel and a couple of draft picks as well. So that's why they're in second. Toronto, again, did one big move, got Mark Giordano. They needed someone on the defensive side to help them out. That's why they're in third in the standings. And Boston Bruins, they're in fourth. They didn't do much, but they got their guy on the blue line. So we'll see what happens. But let's talk about that Tampa Bay Lightning trade. Brandon Hagel and two fourth-round picks for 2 first-round picks, Taylor Radish and Boris Tkachuk. Brandon Hagel, 21 goals, 37 points on the season. He's only owned at 12% in fantasy leagues, 360 fantasy points on the season. They also go out and acquire Nick Paul from the Ottawa Senators for Matthew Joseph and a pick as well. And I've already looked at daily faceoff. I've looked at the lineup combinations. Both Brandon Hagel and Nick Paul are going on the third line, and that third line with Ross Colton centering them looks a lot better. And I already there's nothing I would change with their fourth line. I think their fourth line is absolutely amazing. That third line looks incredible now with Brandon Hagel and Nick Paul on the wings.
Hey, man, we talked about how some of these moves could really affect the fantasy value of some of these guys. I think right there immediately, Nick Paul and Brandon Hagel immediately become a couple of targets that are probably, like you said, out there in some leagues. If teams have them, you might want to think about paying the price to acquire them, because we know the Tampa Bay Lightning are of quality. We know that they're going to be in the mix down the stretch here. I talk about it a lot. But, man, just from like an outside looking in perspective, the Tampa Bay, all of a sudden, the Floridian teams are just flexing their muscle, and their forward groups are just on paper, Steele. I'm shaking in my boots if I'm the Boston Bruins and Toronto Maple Leafs, because as much as it was, yes, a very, busy Atlantic Division, I think it's clear where the quality lies.
Yeah, and even before any of those trades happened, the fact that, they were averaging, 6 goals a game, they were scoring at an incredible pace there, and they were just getting it from up and down their lineup as well. So the fact that they can add Claude Giroux, and he's been the best player for the Philadelphia Flyers, and he's just going to add to that top line. Even Ben Chiarot, he was, being a little bit more productive offensively before he was dealt to the Panthers as well. So the fact that they were able to get this, for me, we'll get into it a little bit more for the Stanley Cup odds later in segment 3. But for me, the Florida Panthers are looking like the best team in the NHL right now.
Hey, look, we're focusing on the Atlantic right now, but we're definitely going to be talking about some West Coast action. You teased the Minnesota Wild making moves as well. We're going to talk about the Colorado Avalanche. The real thing to look at, Steele, at the end of the day is these teams are going to have to go through each other at some point, right? They are going to have to fit, and some combination we won't really know. But the awesome part is we're going to be able to watch it all unfold and really see the quality of these additions put to the test. But at the end of the day, from a fantasy side of things, which is what we're here to also do, is you can't ignore the booted value in guys like Claude Giroux, Ben Chiarot, Hagel, all these guys, Nick Paul, all of these guys immediately, even Hampus Lindholm and Mark Giordano, immediately all of those guys, fantasy value goes up. We're going to be taking a look at more fantasy value. Coming up next, we are going to be looking at some other deals from around the league as well. But I want to talk about Bet Online. It's that time of year again, and college basketball is back in a big way. For all the latest odds and contests to player props, betonline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season, and it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your supporting wagering and information needs, including live betting and all your favorite casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us on an extra special Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast episode. This is a live show. It is a big day on the NHL calendar for teams across the league making additions to their roster in a big push. Thank you so much for always showing us love and making us your first listen every single day. We are here Monday to Friday and a part of the Locked On Network. And we are proud to be that, Steele. Thank you for being here, my brother. We have a lot more to talk about this episode, including breaking down some fantasy and some Stanley Cup odds. Whew, I think I might need a water, pal. This has been a good episode so far.
It's been pretty good. We just went through the Atlantic Division. We're going to head out west. We are going to get to the Minnesota Wild very, very soon. But I was just looking at my phone. The Dallas Stars have acquired Vladislav Nemestikov from the Detroit Red Wings, as well as earlier in the day, they acquired Scott Wedgwood, who you and I were just talking about a couple episodes ago. So it looks like, to me at least, I know they have a couple of goalies in their back pocket, but for me, it's got to be Jake Ottinger and Scott Wedgwood backing him up. And then Vladislav Nemestikov, I think, really helps them up front. They have not been getting a ton of scoring besides their top line of Rupe Hintz, Joe Pavelski, and Jason Robertson. So the fact that, Nemestikov, he's not a superstar player. He's not going to put them over the top, but he does a lot offensively and can really help them with some of their guys that are struggling right now.
I think, honestly, you make a really interesting point because the Dallas Stars have been have done nothing. We talked about that being Jake Ottinger's crease. It's nice to see not more of a move that's really pushing him. A Scott Wedgwood ad is a nice little insurance move, but what does that say? That is Jake Ottinger's crease, and that's Jake Ottinger's crease for a little while. So take that hot tip. We talked about that last week. So I think that's definitely something to note. And at the end of the day, Steele, you said it, Nemestikov boosts a little bit of offensive support there for a top six group that needs it. I don't know if he's like something to run home on fantasy wise, but hey, keep an eye on him either way, because like I just said before the break, these moves can sometimes really reignite a guy's career playing with the right kind of guys. So you have to keep an eye on that, as well as the Minnesota Wild, Steele.
Yeah, the Minnesota Wild have been, besides the Florida Panthers, probably one of the best teams before trade deadline day. Let's get Locked On host Seth Topol of the Locked On Wild here. Thank you, Seth, for joining us. You must be absolutely ecstatic right now. How are you feeling about some of the trades that they've made during the trade dedeadline day?
Guys, it's been a flurry today, I think is probably the best way to put it. I'm not going to lie, right off the bat, it is really refreshing and invigorating to have a general manager as aggressive as Bill Guerin has been with this deadline. Yeah. We've had Chuck Fletcher for the last almost decade before this, and every deadline was always maybe add one piece, and that's about it. Guerin went out. He addressed the goaltending. He addressed the need for size and physicality with this team, and he really left no doubt that the Wild definitely view themselves as one of the teams in the conversation in the Western Conference to make a serious run. They view themselves as able to compete with Colorado, able to compete with Calgary, able to compete with St. Louis, with Nashville, with Vegas. This was a statement by Bill Guerin that this team is not done this year and that he's got some big plans for the rest of the season.
I love seeing GMs act in the front office how they did on the ice, and Bill Guerin was a bullheaded, aggressive power forward, and it seems like he's doing the same thing in the front office with the Wild's roster. So that's kind of a fun thing to see. But, Marc-Andre Fleury, for sure. Obviously, the biggest name goalie out there, Hall of Famer, Cup rings, still got it. That's clear. But I like some of the other underlying moves. Nick Delorier, adding Middleton, Tyson Jost. Even before adding Fleury, I like the way that they were augmenting their roster. And at the end of the day, what I need to know here is, Seth, is Do you think this is enough to compete with those teams? We know Bill Guerin thinks it's enough. Do you think legitimately there's enough firepower on that lineup to go up against the Florida Panthers, the Colorado Avalanche, and the Tampa Bay Lightning of the world, who up front are absolutely loaded?
I do. And I think what this is going to allow this Wild team to do is to wear teams out. You've got one of the best defensive lines in hockey in Joel Eriksson Ek, Jordan Greenway, and Marcus Foligno. Problem that had been popping up for this team over the last couple of weeks is Foligno having to be the one to retaliate anytime something happens to another member on the team. So you're not getting that line on the ice as much as you would like. Nick Delorier comes in, and it seems like he's got some homicidal tendencies to him on the ice, which I think is exactly what this team needs. And he said it himself. Look, he said, I want to be the guy sitting in the penalty box so that Marcus Foligno is out there on the ice. And it helps that they're good friends, apparently, too, which is great. So it's a team, I think, that was, they were at the top of the standings in the Western Conference early on in the season. The goal scoring has been there all year. We saw some leaks on defense and goaltending. And so it led to me kind of wondering if the Wild were going to do anything at the deadline to kind of jolt this team and say, hey, we believe in you.
Yeah.
We're going to just get you a little help.
Yeah.
I fully expect that these moves are going to reinvigorate this team, knowing now that ownership believed in them enough to give up some assets to make these things happen. But they said, we think with these acquisitions, you guys are right up there at the top of the list.
Yeah, for me personally, like I think the Minnesota Wild are the most underrated team in the NHL. A lot of people don't like watching them play hockey. I absolutely love watching them play. I think they're one of the most annoying teams to play against because they can be getting outshot 30-15 and still be up 1-0 or 2-1 for that matter. So I like the fact that these moves made their team a little bit more grittier, a little bit more physicality. Even Jacob Middleton, I don't like the fact that you have to give up Kaapo Kähkönen, but you get that, like you mentioned, on the back end, they needed some help. You get a little bit more grittier, some grittier guys in Jacob Middleton and Nick Deslauriers. So I like the fact that they get a little bit more physicality. A funny story, I actually fell out of my seat when I saw Marc-Andre Fleury got traded, and then I remembered, oh wait, I have Cam Talbot on my fantasy team, so he might not be playing a lot anymore. So I like the fact that the Minnesota Wild got Fleury, but not so much for my fantasy team moving forward.
Well, and it's funny too because I had a bunch of different episodes in talking about the Fleury move and was pretty adamant that I wasn't sure if it was an upgrade. Like I don't know where they rank, but let's just say the Wild rank goalie wise 20th in the NHL. And again, I'm just throwing out a number.
Yeah.
Is Marc-Andre Fleury this year like 17th? Is that enough to kind of move the needle? But it's very clear that Bill Guerin believes that a lot of his issues were directly tied to the team that Chicago had in front of him.
Right.
And that the Wild have enough upgrades on the roster defensively that he's going to put up better numbers here. And so in that case, if he saw some things that lead him to believe that Fleury will be a better goalie here, then I'm all in.
I'm thinking that this kind of move for a player like Marc-Andre Fleury, you're talking about reigniting something within the Wild room themselves. I think this might reignite with something within Flower himself, another sniff at a Stanley Cup. So we will see what's going to happen here. But either way, all eyes on Minnesota right now because another team who's clearly announced that they think they're good enough and they have gone for it. So along with some other teams in the league, it will be interesting to see if these moves pan out. Seth, thank you so much for joining us for this show, and stay tuned for lots more Locked On Wild coverage on the Locked On Fantasy Network. Thanks, Seth.
Thanks, guys.
Steele, I do want to point this out because I knew you fell off the chair and you hurt yourself, but you might fall off the chair when I tell you about these Stanley Cup odds that I know we're going to get into later in the show. The final segment of the show, we'll talk about some more bets. We'll talk about some more odds, but I do want to just quickly mention before we get on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, these updated Stanley Cup odds still have Minnesota behind teams like the Rangers, the Oilers, the Penguins, the Golden Knights, the Leafs. You are finding some really awesome value here with the Wild still. Let's not get into it too much, but I just wanted to make that note because these big deals have not translated into much movement on their Stanley Cup odds, which I just wanted to point that out. Good sir.
It's because people really don't believe in the Minnesota Wild, and I really don't understand why. They have a really good team. For me, I think the reason is because they don't have a superstar name forward or a defenseman. They don't have an Austin. They don't have a Connor McDavid. They don't have a Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin. You get my point. But 100%. This is a very underrated team, and a lot of people just think that they're not good enough. And it's going to come back to bite them.
At the end of the day, Kirill Kaprizov is on his way to being a superstar. But look, we know a team we do know a team that does have a couple of bona fide superstars, names that people are not sleeping on. A team in the Pittsburgh Penguins that it looked like might not make too much noise on the deadline day. We knew they were looking to add some offensive pop. They make a little move and add Rickard Rakell. We have Hunter Hotties here of the Locked On Pens podcast. He's going to provide some insight. I'm interested to know what you think. Obviously, this is a good team. The window for winning closing in Pittsburgh, but very, very much in the mix for this Stanley Cup. Hunter, do you think they did enough?
Yeah, no, I definitely think they did. It looked like for a while the Penguins were probably not going to make a trade. Ron Hextall looked like they were just going to stand pat, say they like their team and all that, but at the last second they go out and get Rickard Rakell, a player that definitely I think parts of the fan base has wanted for the last few years, just because the Ducks have been bad and he's been probably one of their best players, and now they finally got him, and they finally have that other top six winger that they can put on Evgeny Malkin's line, because it's basically been an island of misfit toys next to his right wing side. I think left wing, they've been comfortable with Danton Heinen up there. When Jason Zucker hopefully comes back, he might be a mainstay up there because he's played his best hockey next to Gino. But, they've been searching for another scoring winger for a while now, and they were finally able to get it. I know they gave up, looks like 4 assets in return. They dealt from a position of strength. Aston Reese and Dominic Simone, 2 good bottom 6 players that obviously will help the Ducks in that department. But when you have an opportunity to make the team better and you're going all in for perhaps the final time in the Crosby, Malkin, and Letang era, you got to do it. This team is too good, I think, to stand pat. They're one of the 5 to 7 best teams in the league this year. The record proves it. The data proves it. So I'm very happy with this acquisition.
Before I let Steele jump in here with this, I wanted to say that when I looked at, and I think Steele also pointed this out, Rickard Rakell looked like the player they were going to go for. You obviously have the Ducks connection with Brian Burke in the front office. Yeah. I really actually like all the things you just broke down there, especially because I have a couple of big future Stanley Cup bets on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Their odds are too juicy when you have Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby. So like I teased a second ago, lots more Stanley Cup odds coming up around the break. But Steele, what do you have for our man Hunter?
Well, I think that was kind of the problem with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like, they were still winning games, but even at the beginning of the season, they had so many injuries. It was kind of tough to, figure out who was going to be paired up with who. No matter what, whoever plays on the top line with Sidney Crosby. We saw that with Evan Rodriguez this year. He played absolutely out of his mind. He was dominant on the top line. But once you get Brian Rust back or Jake Gensel back in the lineup, he gets shifted down the lineup, and he's not producing as much. So we kind of saw that they're, now that they're getting a little bit more healthier and getting the regular guys back, they got to figure out who's going to be where. And, I think that's really going to help Gino in the second line with Rickard Rakell, because we even saw that last year when they acquired Jeff Carter at the deadline. He came in and he was top three in scoring for the remainder of the season for deadline acquisition. So hopefully Rickard Rakell can kind of join kind of follow Jeff Carter's footsteps there.
That would be awesome. I know Carter was basically at a point per game rate when he came in, and trust me, I don't think anyone, including me, anyone that covers the team, anyone in the fan base saw that coming, because he was good in LA, but he wasn't that good, and obviously it went down a little bit this year. But that would be the dream scenario if he can. Rakell, that is, rediscover that scoring touch. He's at 16 goals this year. I believe it's 28 points in 51 games. From what I just had my live show with Jesse Marshall. So it makes the team a lot more formidable down forward wise. They already are one of the deepest teams in the league. This allows for a player like Evan Rodriguez to slide down to the third line, who's been good this year. Danton Heinen, especially, he's 3 goals away from tying his career high. Jeff Carter can man that third line center spot, and then they can ice whatever fourth line they want with Teddy Blue or Brock McGinn when he's healthy. And then if they want to put Brian Boyle on there, who's surprised a lot of people, they can do that as well. So, this was a big acquisition with how the other Metro teams today really improved. Domi to Carolina. The Rangers go out and get a couple forwards. The Capitals go out and get a couple forwards. The Atlantic is loading up. The Penguins just couldn't stand pat. So I'm happy that they decided to join the fun and, just make it for one heck of a finish here.
Nathan Boyu also added on the blue line, a sneaky little addition. I've talked a lot about how when I see Brian Burke and Ron Hextall up there just hashing plans, those are 2 hockey minds that I trust with my franchise, explicitly 100%. So when I heard they might not make any moves, I was like, wow, do they really think they're that good? But I still think even these 2 more so. I know Ricard Raquel can slot into the top 6, maybe more on the minor side of things, which I think really just speaks volumes to the quality of team those 2 guys think they have. And I think down the stretch, you will see a lot of quality hockey from Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby. Hunter, thank you so much for hopping on the show today on this YouTube Live. We really appreciate it. Good luck down the stretch, my friend.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you all so much for having me on, and we'll see what the Penguins can do down the stretch.
Most definitely. Hey, guys. Thank you for being here. Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, live trade deadline reaction show with Flip, Livingstone, and Steele, Rodin, and a slew of local hosts from across the Locked On network. Listen, there is a lot to talk about today, a lot. Listen, Hunter just mentioned it. Teams loading up all over the place. And I think one of those teams is also, the New York Rangers. A couple of nice little additions here. So we're going to talk to John Chick of Locked On Rangers to see if, maybe he thinks, is this enough from the Rangers? I'm interested in hearing these hosts. They watch a lot more of these teams than we do. They all seem to be confident in their team's ad steal from so far when we talk to them, right? Yeah. Is that enough? Everyone thinks it's enough. So it'll be interesting to see because the Rangers made some nice moves too. So
what is going on, hockey fans? It's John Chick with Locked On New York Rangers. The Rangers striking a couple of very exciting trades at the 0 hour here. They do a deal with the Winnipeg Jets and bring in Andrew Kopp. I'm not yet seeing what the return is as far as what it cost the Rangers to acquire Andrew Kopp. They also bring in Tyler Mott from the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for a 4th-round draft pick in 2023. And I like both these moves a lot. We'll start with Kopp. He's kind of the attention grabber here. The thing I love about Kopp, and it's a description that I've used in the past on Locked On New York Rangers, talking about several other players. I feel like Kopp is one of those guys. He's a B+ at everything. This is somebody who can give you a lot of versatility. He can play center. He can play both wings. He can help out on the power play. The Rangers' second power play unit could probably use a little bit of a jolt, and I'm sure he could help there. He can play on the penalty kill. He can play with a little bit of grit. He just has a rock-solid all-around game, and somebody who's added a little bit of scoring in recent seasons on top of being a really good defensive forward. On top of that, you bring in Tyler Mott. Mott's not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but the price was right, only giving up a 4th-rounder in 2023 to bring in Mott, somebody that can kind of round out the bottom 6 and maybe kind of fortify the 3rd line. Maybe he's on the 4th line at times. We'll see how the Rangers look to line up. It's definitely going to be a very interesting and new-look team that takes the ice on Tuesday night against the Devils, but I'm very much looking forward to it. The Justin Braun trade was a little bit but I like both these pickups a lot, especially Andrew Kopp. I think he's really going to help this team. We'll talk about all of this in the next episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
Well, there you have it, Steele. A quick talking John Chick on the Rangers. And at the end of the day, you and I have talked a lot about the Rangers, right? Those moves, I think a couple of the guys, especially Andrew Kopp, you're going to have to take a look at now from a fantasy side of things. His value goes up. But realistically, Tyler Mott also added, Frank Vetrano added, Justin Braun added. Rangers maybe not going for it in as a big way, but we know that this team is starting to look real good, isn't it, Steele? And now they get even deeper. Keep an eye on the Rangers.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that the Rangers didn't make a little bit more of an aggressive move for an offensive juggernaut type of player. But again, Andrew Kopp is no slouch as well. He does really well on the penalty kill, and we all know that the Rangers are one of the top penalty kill teams in the league right now. They're very offensive minded, especially shorthanded. They want to jump on those opportunities, and Andrew Kopp does that a lot. So he's owned at 32% right now. I expect his stock to go a little bit up as well for fantasy value wise. You know, not just the New York Rangers, but the Colorado Avalanche, a couple of trades as well. They traded for Nico Sturm from the Minnesota Wild, Josh Manson on the back as well from the Anaheim Ducks. But let's hear from Colorado Avalanche host Chris Maselli for his Locked On Now for the Arturi Lehkonen trade.
Colorado Avalanche with one final move up their sleeve, and this time it is for Arturi Lehkonen, forward from the Montreal Canadiens. They give up highly sought-after prospect Justin Barron and a second-round pick in 2024, and Montreal retains half of Lehkonen's salary, which seems to be Joe Sakic's sweet spot in getting teams to do that. But this just solidifies the Avalanche with a trio of moves during the deadline season that they are just going for this thing. They're not sitting back, waiting on the team that they have to hopefully produce in the playoffs. They went after players that needed to fill spots, and Joe Sakic did it in droves. This is a great haul overall for the Avs for the entire trade deadline season. But this move in particular was kind of one the Avs fans were waiting for. A big move. I think this would be it, maybe with the Josh Manson deal. But Lehkonen is a great get, and the best thing about it is he could not be a rental. It's possible he is a restricted free agent. So going into next year, you have rights to sign him. So that alone is a great move by Joe Sakic in not getting a definite rental. You give up Justin Barron, who a lot of teams wanted, and you had high hopes for him. But man, getting Lehkonen and then likely signing him next year due to his restricted free agency is another brilliant move by Joe Sakic.
I like how confident all these Locked On local hosts are. They're just jazzed up. That's where maybe we have that benefit, Steele, of being separated, of not being super close to every single team. We have a little bit of an outside looking in angle. And, we've talked mostly about these teams that have loaded up, made a bunch of moves. Some teams, out west, not really doing too much. Vegas didn't do much. Calgary, before the deadline, made their moves, and I think that was kind of expected. So, some teams making moves, some teams making tons. We are still going to talk fantasy breakdown, Stanley Cup odds, and lots more around the break, though, aren't we, Steele?
We are. Don't forget that also the Carolina Hurricanes acquired Max Domi from the Columbus Blue Jackets as well. So they get a little bit, they get a small bulldog in Max Domi. He's not afraid to drop the gloves and get a little dirty in those corners. We all know the type of game that he plays. So, kudos to the Hurricanes for able to acquire him. We are going to finish off the show in a moment with a look at updated Stanley Cup odds from our friends at Bet Online, plus which trades will have the biggest impact for fantasy implications down the stretch. Will any of the key players moved help you win your fantasy championship? We discuss next, but first we have to hear from our friends at Rock Auto. With the increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now almost impossible for local chain auto parts stores to have what you need in stock. There's so many intimidating questions. And often pointless questions. I know I myself get confused, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I know a lot of people out there are like me, get confused. You have the devices at home and in your pocket to rockauto.com. You'll be able to save time, save money when using rockauto.com. And why would you choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership when you can save your money and time from rockauto.com? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is around $350 from a local chain store when you can get it for $215 from Rock Auto. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Locked On Now in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Rock Auto, reliable prices, amazing selections, all the parts your car will ever need from rockauto.com. Thank you for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every day. Don't forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. So make sure you subscribe and hit the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. So thank you so much for that. Flip, we're getting to the end of our NHL Trade Deadline reaction show. Just 10 more minutes left in the show. But we got to talk about the updated Stanley Cup odds. Everything shifting around because of these trades, as well as, some fantasy value for the players that were traded as well. Let's start with the Stanley Cup odds. They, right here on the screen, Avalanche at plus 400. The Panthers plus 650. The Flames move up as well to plus 900. And you mentioned it off the top. The Minnesota Wild have not really moved compared to, the other teams. Even the Bruins at plus 1,400 now, still ahead of the Minnesota Wild, who are at plus 2,200. What are your thoughts on this updated Stanley Cup odds from BetOnline?
I would like to note this, Steele, because you were calling me Kooky Pants Flip, Kooky Pants McGee, and have a look. The Edmonton Oilers at more of a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. I said sprinkle a 20, sprinkle a 30, and look, maybe I'm not as crazy as I thought. No, do I think they're going to win it? No, do I think they're going to win it? But man, is that a juicy odd. Look, there is a lot of value here, okay? This is how I know I'm a degenerate. I know I have a little bit too much time to look at these kinds of odds, because when I see this, shout out to our friends at BetOnline, by the way. Thank you for the updated odds. Do not sleep on their options. We talked about that. Steele, I look at this, yes, Panthers at 650 for sure. But when I look at value, I'm looking Rangers. I'm looking Penguins even. I know that those come out of the same division, but if you're talking about a couple of value bets here for a 20 bean or a 30 bean or a $50 bet, there is definitely some value to be had here, my friend. Like the Wild at plus 2,200, I don't think you can go wrong with a couple of dollars there.
For me, the value teams I'm looking at right now, the Panthers are at plus 650. I think there is a ton of value there, but the teams I'm looking at are the Lightning at plus 900. They're looking to three-peat for the Stanley Cup again. And the couple of moves that they made, acquiring Nick Paul as well as Brandon Hagel, who had a terrific season with the Chicago Blackhawks, you can't go wrong with the Tampa Bay Lightning at plus 900. But again, you mentioned it right there. If BetOnline is going to give me plus 2,200 on the Minnesota Wild, I'm going to take that every single time, especially with the moves they have made today. Very underrated team. A lot of people sleep on the Minnesota Wild, and I'm going to take advantage here and put some money down at plus 2,200.
The reason why the numbers are where they are, Avalanche favorite, Panthers are second favorite, is because they deserve to be. And no, I'm not talking, I think the Wild have a better shot at winning the cup. That's not true. But when the playoffs start, we know that this is a different season. And as much as these odds do hold some water, they don't hold it all. And when it comes to putting money down on teams at this time of year, you can't go wrong when you look at some value for some smaller bets and really just sit back and enjoy the best time on the hockey schedule. And this is one of those, Steele. And, this is a fantasy show, so I also want to wrap before, we wrap up with the winners and losers of the day. I do really want to just kind of touch on, the fantasy impact of what I think is potentially the biggest move. We've talked about Claude Giroux. I think that could be huge. I think that at the end of it all, I like what the Florida Panthers did the best. They're probably my big winners of the day. But, man, the value for a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury down the stretch here, we talk about goalie creases for fantasy. His value just went way, way, way up. And if you can get Marc-Andre Fleury for the stretch run or for your playoffs for fantasy, I think that's a move that you most definitely have to consider.
There's a lot of players that you have to consider to, pick up on the waiver wire, guys who are under 50% owned. We talked about it.
Yep.
Even Claude Giroux, he's only owned at 75% on Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. If you're in a league and Claude Giroux is on the waiver wire, get off your butt and pick him up right now, because he's on the Florida Panthers as of today, and he's playing on the top line with Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau and all of those guys who we know produce at an extraordinary amount. So Claude Giroux at 75% owned, Giordano at 51% owned, Brandon Hagel, he's at 32, or he's at 12. Andrew Kopp's at 32. There's guys out there who have been traded to go into better teams, and their stock value is going to rise in the next couple of days. So you better jump on them quick.
Andrew Kopp, I'm glad you mentioned it. That was another guy on my list in terms of definitely double circle for his value going way, way up for a Rangers team that I think I teased it a little bit earlier in the show. This team is starting to really round into form, right? Like shouts to Ray Ferraro on the TSN trade bait today, mentioning that looks like a playoff team rounding into form. And when you're doing that at the end of March, that is when you start to flex your playoff muscles. You don't round into form at the end of April. That might be too late. You need to hit the playoffs running, and I think the Rangers will be that. And, they're not my big winner of the day, Steele, but they're up there on the winners list. I'm intrigued to see who you think is the winner of the day. Obviously there's a couple of clear winners. I've mentioned it. I think it's the Florida Panthers. I think they've really positioned themselves well to strike. The Rangers have honorable mention. So do even the Calgary Flames for the moves that they made before the deadline. But my big winners of the day and the lead up to it is the Florida Panthers, Steele.
I think it has to be the Florida Panthers. They made the strongest moves. They've acquired some of the top 5 guys who were on the trade bait list. So for me, being able to get Claude Giroux, Ben Chiarot, even Hag who's gonna on their 6th on the 3rd pairing now. The fact that they're able to go out and get out some very, very strong guys, and it blows my mind. Even the fact that they were the strongest team before they made these moves. So I'm with you right there. The Florida Panthers for me are the winners for the trade deadline day.
General manager, Zito, he deserves a lot of credit. I think the odds are still juicy for them at the Cup. I believe I was sending you some screenshots over the weekend saying, I'm jumping on this. I'm jumping on this before Claude Giroux lands. I got the Florida Panthers at 8-1. I got them at 7-1, and the odd is dropping. So I hope you were listening last week when I said you should sprinkle. Thank you for that. And yes, I believe they're the biggest winners of the day. Losers, man. I don't know. Losers on the day. Steele, like there's a couple out there. I don't know. Like who are you thinking? Like, because it's really hard for me to put my finger on because there were a lot of teams out there that I really expected to be much more active than they were. And I'm not going to go as far as to say the Pittsburgh Penguins are a loser because they got their guy in Rickard Rakell. But there's definitely some teams out there that I think should have been a lot more active. Do you have one that pops to the top of your head?
I have a couple. We won't get too deep into them, but for me, it's the Washington Capitals. They go out and get Marcus Johansson. He played for them for 6 years, I believe, really well. So they go out and make one move, I believe, as well as the Los Angeles Kings. They didn't really do much today as well. I think it's going to be difficult for them, especially being in that division with the teams they're up against. I would have expected a little bit more from the Kings organization to acquire a couple more guys offensively. But again, they're still a great team. I just thought they would have done a little bit more.
Me too. And at the end of it all, we knew Kyle Dubas didn't want to trade his first round pick. And I think you made an excellent point about this actually clearly indicates to them how tough it is going to be to get out of the first round, and maybe the moves that were available that made sense weren't going to even push the needle forward. But I think the Leafs needed to make an ad. And I know the Harry Sateri thing kind of got slipped up from under them, but if that's really where we're at with bolstering the goaltending in Toronto, man, it does not leave me feeling confident heading into the playoffs in any way, shape, or form. I really hope I'm proven wrong with this Toronto Maple Leafs team, and I hope the forward group just comes out and absolutely stuns in the first round. I don't see it happening, but I really expected the Leafs to be making some sort of other moves. Hey, I'm not a GM. I know these are hard things to make happen, but they clearly are showing you're having to go up against these teams in Florida. Come on now. You needed to do something, and even something to show that room that you were doing it. The Harry Sateri thing is not good enough. And, at the end of it all, it even would have been nice to bring back a guy like James Reimer if that was possible, right? just to throw the fans in a frenzy. Shout out to producer Sean on the 1s and 2s because he would have been liking that move. But look, at the end of the day, Steele, I think you're right. The LA Kings should have been more active as well. But, I really just hope that everyone's enjoyed the coverage today because I've had a lot of fun with you, my brother.
It's been a lot of fun, a lot to digest, going through these trades. I don't think it would have been just Sean who would have been jumping out of their seat. I think a lot of people would have loved to see James Reimer back in, the Maple Leafs logo and backing up Jack Campbell. Hopefully Jack Campbell can get back to his form back in the first half of the season, just we can ride him the entire way for a deep playoff run. But everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast for the NHL Trade Deadline Show, making it your first listen every day. Thank you so much. If you want more gambling advice, especially for the updated Stanley Cup odds, make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all podcast platforms, just like this podcast right here. So like I said before, please make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button, and make sure and once you do, you'll get the latest episodes of Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast as soon as they're available each and every day, Monday to Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So you got to make sure you hit the subscribe and the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the support and all the love out there. So thank you so much for tuning in for today's podcast and the NHL Trade Deadline Show with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your Stanley Cup, odds out there. And we shall see you back here again tomorrow.